Hi, everybody. So good to see you guys. Hi, Max and Shannon. Hi, guys. Bom dia. I think that's Spanish, right? So good to see you guys. How are you? How is the week? I guess it's not like a full week. I guess I saw you guys on Tuesday. But how are things going? I hope you guys are all doing well. Did you guys get a chance to go through the past webinar and check everything out? Hi. You guys are back for Nelly's back for another round of emotional mastery tools. So I wanted to start off by just saying hi, guys. Hi, everybody. By just saying thank you to Nelly and to Ellie, who was here as well, for just sharing their experiences last week. I guess last webinar on Tuesday. Because I think it was really powerful and really helpful. I tried to hold the webinar at this time to accommodate a few people who are in Europe and who were asking for webinar time. I hope it worked. I let everybody know a little bit in advance. I'm not sure if they're here or not, but I'll probably switch up a time like once a month. So it'll always be Tuesday, Saturdays for the next while, but once a month or so, I'll just sort of change it up. I know this is sort of like during the workday for a lot of people in North America. Or maybe just before the workday for people on the West Coast. Okay, so I'm going to start. And good, I'm so glad, Shannon. No, the next webinar will be back to Saturdays. I was just doing this one time because, same time. So we'll keep that time for a while, Tuesday evenings and Saturdays. And then I'll change it every couple of months just for new people, new times, just to sort of like accommodate anybody who can't make those regular webinars. But I'm going to be collecting feedback a lot on what times work for you guys. There's a good amount of people who can't make certain times or can. I'm glad to hear that, Max. So hi, Phoebe. So I just want to like sort of feel out what times are working, what times are not working. I know they're recorded anyways, and I know everybody's going back and listening to the recording. A lot of people are emailing me like, oh, I listened to this recording and that recording. So that's wonderful. But I just want to make sure that I'm checking in and accommodating wherever I can. So, and any feedback you guys ever have, like, hey, can you do this? Can you, like, I just want to absorb everything. And I like to think that historically I've written courses almost through client sessions, like just seeing like a lot of the major problems that people are experiencing. There's a tremendous amount of patterns. And then it's like, oh my gosh, there's a need here where people don't have tools, don't have resources. And so I write courses based on just what I'm hearing all the time. I've adapted courses so far just because the feedback I'm getting just before I record them. I'm like, oh, okay, people want to hear this in the relationship mastery course. And so always your feedback is welcomed. I'm writing these courses for you guys. And so please feel free to share anything that you want to see in there. Hi, Oslam. Okay, so I am going to start. Hi, Shayna. So I'm going to start and just go into some of the questions that I've been getting that are just around emotional mastery. A lot of really great questions. You guys are amazing. Honestly, I'm like endlessly impressed. Oh, Marcelo, it's so funny. I just went into the Facebook group to look at some of the questions, and I see that you posted a Trevor Hall song. I love Trevor Hall, and I love that song. I think in one of the previous webinars, I talked about the song Bowl of Light from him. So that's cool that you posted that in there. Okay, so what I'm going to go through and talk about are just some of the questions related to emotional mastery. I'm so impressed with this whole group all the time. Like I'm just like so grateful that there are so many of you. Like I feel like I go in here every couple of days and try to answer questions and catch up on things and make sure that everybody has help and support when they need it. But honestly, I'm like, you guys are just some of the Shannon. I think I saw Shannon post something in there the other day, and I was like, that's exactly what I would have put in there. I can't remember what it was about, but I just remember thinking, what a great, sorry, I'm looking at some of the questions in here. What a great question you asked. I think it was about it was for somebody who had a fight with their friend. I think it was Jay's post. And Shannon posted a really insightful question. So you guys are doing a great job. And thank you for endlessly supporting one another. And I'm going to go through and just answer some of the emotional mastery questions that I've seen that I thought were appropriate for today. And then we'll do live examples. So one of the first ones I get asked a lot. Sorry, let me just drink water for a second. I talk a lot all week. And by Friday, my voice is like just waning. So one of the questions, and this is a phenomenal question, and this comes up a lot, and this is really a process of getting to know yourself and understanding in here. But one of the questions I get asked all the time is like, when do I know if I'm telling myself a story? And when do I know if I have a need? Okay, so if you look at the emotional processing worksheet, do I have a copy of it with me? No. If you look at the emotional processing worksheet, you'll see the questions, and this is my favorite tool. I'm going to push this tool everywhere in the school because truly the only reasons we emotionally suffer are because we have a painful story that we're telling ourselves, we have a painful perception of an experience, or we have an unmet need, okay? And it always boils down to one or both of those two things. And usually it's actually both, but it's the idea is that we always have to remove the story first. We always work on the story first. And the reason for this is that when we're really triggered and activated, it's usually because we're in the story. Okay, so I like to think of pain as the unmet need, and pain is always manageable. It will hurt, it will feel uncomfortable, it won't feel good, but pain is the unmet need. Okay, and it's really the attachment to that unmet need. And then suffering is the story we tell about that unmet need. Okay, so it's the meaning we give to that unmet need. And what happens here is when we're in suffering, okay, it's because we're so embedded in the story, and suffering feels excruciating, and suffering also feels like suffering blurs our needs. Let's just say that. So let's say, for example, and I think I've used this example before, but let's say, for example, somebody hurts you, okay, emotionally. Somebody calls you a rude name. If you have a really big trigger point around that, like for you, that rude name was something you were called in childhood when, your parents were attacking you and you felt vulnerable and criticized and felt like you had nobody to talk to. And if there's a lot of like pent up emotion stored in subconscious memories from past experiences, then when that happens in real time, you're going to, somebody calls you that name again in your adult life. And it's not just the name and somebody having a bad day and being rude. It's the name plus helplessness, plus attacked, plus unloved, plus all these other stored interpretations that are sort of embedded in that past memory that's stored in your subconscious mind. And now when you're triggered, you're not just experiencing this rude comment somebody makes today in real time, you're experiencing that plus all of the other subconscious emotions that's stored flooding to the surface. And I'm sure you guys know this because I say this a lot, but that's really what triggering is. It's this experience plus the subconsciously stored experience that your subconscious mind has sort of opened up like a filing cabinet and gone, oh, look, it's all this stuff here. And now you're experiencing both. And that's why it feels unmanageable. And so we have to work through that story first, because when we are extremely triggered, what happens is we can think, oh my gosh, this person called me a rude name. And you might think that the best thing to do is like dump a glass of water on them or hit them or run them over with your car or something. Like, these are silly examples, but like, you might think that the need is to do something so extreme because you're looking at the need through the perceptual filter of your suffering and all of that wounding. So we always work on the story first, and sometimes the story will be 100% true, and then we just go right to the needs. But we have to check in, because a theme that's come up this week when I've been talking to different people is a lot of people struggle with self-trust. And one of the things I say to people is, well, you struggle with self-trust because you're not taking the time to actually consider your options. We assume that we're supposed to know the answers like this, like, oh, I should know like what my need is immediately. No. You should pause, white everybody out for a second. Imagine nobody has opinions. Imagine there's no external factors that matter, money, any of that stuff. And then sit with yourself and ask yourself the series of questions that will bring you to the answer that you're looking for. And sometimes we don't build self-trust because we haven't built a relationship with ourselves where we pause and actually consider things. And so we want to get into that habit. Something bothers you, something irritates you, something triggers you. Okay, let me work through the story first. And even if I think the story is going to be true, I check in anyways. I peel that story back. I disidentify from it. I create space between my witnessing self and my thinking. And then I get to go underneath that and identify what the needs are once the story's gone. And the need might be to set a boundary, to tell somebody that something is inappropriate. So a lot of individuals, hi guys, I see a lot of you guys jumping in here. And so a lot of us think that the need is something very, hi Alex, I'm glad to hear that. That's awesome. So a lot of what happens is we think that the need is something so extreme in the moment that we're really activated, really triggered. And when we're able to step back and access our truth outside of the story, that's when we get really in touch with our need. So a lot of people will say, okay, how can I tell if it's the story that I'm telling myself that's triggering me or the unmet need? And the answer to this question is to always sit with yourself and consider, really ponder on the story first. If you're sitting there and let's just use a really simple example. Let's say your partner is dismissive avoidant and they come home and they're very cold. You're going to have a need for connection or for warmth. That's okay. But what you want to do is you want to be able to separate from that, undo the story first, because you might tell the story, this person doesn't care about me. This is never going to work. And if you're lost in that story, how are you going to go treat that person when you try to communicate your need? Are you going to be like, hey, I noticed this and I noticed you're feeling a little bit off or a little bit cold and I'd love for you to be present when you have the opportunity? Or are you going to be like, you never spend time being present? It's going to come across in two different ways. One way is going to increase the chances of you getting the need met. The other is going to drastically decrease the chances. And so when we're not working through the story first, we're also usually not communicating the need effectively and thus not getting the need met effectively. So this is where we want to be able to, the answer to this question is always consider the story first. Look for all of the story that could possibly exist in there. Write them all on paper, dump them all out. This is something really important. I almost want to type this in the chat. I want you guys to all remember this. I'll type this in here so you guys can just copy and paste it if you want to keep it. The level of suffering you're experiencing is directly correlated to how many stories you have embedded in a perception. I'm not sure if I spelled embedded properly. Embedded in a perception. Okay, so it's like this. If I go through a breakup, okay, and I'm thinking of different people I've historically seen go through breakups. Some people are fine because they're like, okay, their stories are the relationship wasn't working. We tried everything and now it was really time to move on. And for other people, the story is I'm unloved forever now and nobody will care about me in the future. And that's when it's so painful. That's when it's so excruciating. And so one person who has one story that says I'm going to be unloved forever, and another person who has I'm going to be unloved forever. I was never loved. I'm going to be alone. I'm going to lose all my friends and family. I'm going to obviously, even though this is also an excruciating story, this person's going to be suffering significantly more. And the reason for that is because they have more stories embedded in this experience, in this perceptual filter. Okay, so that's what we want to be able to work with. And if you guys noticed last time, I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch the last webinar, but they were beautiful examples. And Nellie was sharing, she was going through a breakup and there were a few stories in there and we worked through them one by one by one by one. And that's the idea. Okay. We don't just work through the first story. We work through all the stories if it's a big triggering event. In some cases, you will literally be able to recognize a story and just disidentify. I was speaking to somebody yesterday and she was saying, what did she say? She said, she was feeling insecure about getting into a relationship because she felt like she had to get laser hair removal on her arms first. And this girl was she's very successful, master's degree in engineering, very smart, very on top of everything. And, we talked about it and I said, okay, so basically you're saying it sort of led to that point in conversation. And then we talked about the actual story. Okay, so your subconscious is believing you have to get laser hair removal on your arms in order to be worthy of love or a relationship. And she just burst out laughing, right? She's like, oh my God. And right there, sometimes our stories will go when we just see them in the light of our conscious awareness. because it's so easy to be able to put these two things together and go, oh my goodness, like I'm telling myself a really painful story that doesn't even really make sense. But then there are other times where we have to sit with the story and we have to truly ponder, like truly sit with it, truly ask and figure out what's going on. Thank you, Max and Alex. I appreciate that. So truly ponder and truly see what's going on beneath the surface there. Okay. Let me just see here. So I have a couple questions in here, but that's the answer. So 2 questions that I just want to be really clear about there. How do we know if it's the story or the need? By sitting with the story. And as soon as we have an opposing piece of proof for the story, we know the story is not 100% true. And so we don't want to buy into or invest in anything that we don't know to be 100% certain, because we're investing in a delusion. Okay, so if your coworker is rude and you think your coworker hates you, it might look like your coworker doesn't like you because they're constantly rude. But what if your coworker is just kind of a rude person? Do they treat other people like that? Did they misinterpret a situation? Did they and if you have anything that really opposes it, why are you investing your thought energy and emotional energy into a story that might just be fabricated, might just be of your imagination, and that's going to make you suffer? And so when we recognize, hey, this may not be 100% true, we enter into sort of like the don't know mind, which is I can't know that, so I'm not going to invest my energy in that. And we ideally always want to return to a fair and balanced perspective. So a space of being able to say, it could be this and it could be this. It could be this really negative thing. It could be this other very impersonal thing. And because I can't know, I'm not going to attach to any side of the story. Because as soon as I attach to the story, I'm identified with it. My mind runs the story on autopilot. Any thoughts that I'm identified with, that I'm not separating myself from and noticing and questioning, my subconscious mind is automatically responding to as if it's an absolute truth. So if you tell this story in passing to yourself that says, everybody in my office doesn't like me, you're living in a reality where you might think it's just an innocent passing thought. You're living in a reality that day at that time, or maybe every day, if you are really invested in that story, where everybody in your office doesn't like you. And that's a nightmare, right? And that's how we enter into these spaces of nightmare, right? It's almost like our mind can create a really scary place. And I've seen a lot of individuals who go through that and who have so many painful stories, and they're living in like a nightmare a little bit. And then when they start questioning and undoing and separating themselves from these stories and noticing these things, all of a sudden they're empowered to start creating real change. And then you get to the needs, and then the needs become a very simple process of getting met. So the answer to the question is to always sit with the story first, always try to disprove it. If you have any evidence, that you're just attached to a story that's bringing you into a nightmare. And then you go underneath and you identify what the need is from that next space. Okay. So a couple questions in here. And again, another really important part is just when you're building self-trust. Somebody asked me this question. How do you build self-trust? You build self-trust by actually considering things with yourself, by actually, before making an opinion or jumping to a conclusion, sitting with yourself and asking yourself these questions. And, sometimes people will say to me, I don't know what I want to do with my life. You probably just haven't spent enough time thinking about it. Eventually, you'll always figure out what the next step is. But you have to sit down and you have to really go through everything and consider your options and lay everything out and maybe spend weeks thinking about it, maybe months. But the absence of knowing is usually very much correlated to the absence of considering for prolonged periods of time and actually doing the work to build that relationship. Just like if somebody in your life, I'm not that close to my cousin. Well, have you spent a lot of time with your cousin? Have you asked the right questions to your cousin? Have you, dug beneath the surface and created pockets of quality time with the person? We'll always get the answers when we sit with ourselves and practice and connect. Okay. So Max says, Thais, is there a way when you see someone being triggered through something you did to support them in coming out of the attack? Great question. Okay. Yeah. So this is wonderful. So Max says, is there a way when you see someone being triggered through something you did to support them in coming out of the attack, freeze, defend mode without giving up your own integrity? What an amazing question. Okay. So yes, there is. Will it always work? No, it's because we're not responsible for how other people feel, right? We're responsible. Let's say you say something, you don't mean to trigger the person. There's only so much you can do, but Two things that will always help and that will often work is number one, validate the person's feelings. Okay. So that's always the first step. When somebody's really triggered, the moment you validate their feelings, it's like, whew, like I've always joked about it. It's like a magic wand that you wave. And it's like, hey, I see that you're feeling, and don't say the feeling of like defensive. I see you're feeling defensive, the actual emotion, right? So like, I see that you're feeling hurt right now. I see that you're feeling angry. I see that you're feeling disconnected, right? Those emotions that they're actually feeling. So try to tune into their experience, express what you think they're feeling, and then you'll start to see them sort of come down from their anger or defensiveness mode. And then you can just ask, hey, I think you misunderstood what I was saying. What do you need right now so that we can like enter back into peace? I want a peaceful situation right now. I come in peace. Sometimes I joke like that if I see somebody being triggered. But it's just like you can sort of re-enter into that space. And the most important thing you can do is stay completely calm. As soon as you buy in emotionally, as soon as your state gets elevated at all, anxiousness, frustration, anything, human beings are picking up on all this at a subconscious level. So as soon as you start getting frustrated, you're like, oh my God, why are they getting defensive? I didn't mean to do that. As soon as you have any ounce of that, it's going to get picked up on and used, and it's going to be ammunition or sort of like energy emotionally put into an argument or a fight. Versus if you are completely calm, then there's no room for that. And what you do, and I think Eckhart Tolle actually talks about this, but what you do, and I've experienced this in my own life many, many times, is by being that calm when someone else is not, you give that person, you become a mirror. You give that person an opportunity to see themselves. And so when you're that calm, when you're that like rooted, what always happens is, even if it doesn't happen in that exact moment, you see somebody come back around a little bit and sometimes apologize later, or sometimes, make a comment after the fact. And so it's a beautiful, powerful tool. Stay very calm, stay very present, validate the other person's emotions. Ask them what they need. Make sure you tell them, I'm not frustrated. I have zero negative feelings towards you at this time. I'm ready to resolve this if you want to. If you need space, that's okay too. And just like by being that calm and being that connected to yourself, you don't give anybody room to blame or take something and keep igniting the argument and fueling it. And then it'll either die off very quickly, or the person will come back and say something later on. And honestly, in my opinion, like that is the epitome of being in integrity towards yourself, because you're staying connected to yourself. You're staying connected. Now, if somebody, like, let's say on the other hand, somebody is like physically abusing you or something, you get out of the situation, obviously. Like, integrity to yourself means maybe like defending or fighting back or something like that. But emotionally, that's the best thing you can do. And then you can always, when the tide has calmed, you can always communicate your emotions and your needs, and always use the framework like, I interpreted this in my reality. You'll see this come out. We have the conflict communication course coming out later today. You always go like this: I interpreted this in my reality as you saying da da da. And just from you saying this is my interpretation, you're not doing anything that's going to continuously fuel or feed an argument. So great question. Yeah, Max, I was thinking that too. If you can tell someone is going through story mode, this is a great question. If you can tell someone is going through story mode, how can you help them or tell them without it being like you're pointing out a flaw? Sorry. I'm far away from the computer and the text looks very small without it seeming like you're pointing out a flaw. So you can ask too. I do this sometimes with different people. So sometimes I'll just ask, can you know that that's 100% true? Is it possible that that's an interpretation you're making about the situation and not 100% the situation? And I don't ever say you're telling a story or that's made up or that's, I just say, is it possible that? And that way you're just sort of inquiring and you're curious. And again, how you handle yourself in that situation does play a role. If you're like, is it possible that you're just making that up? Like if your energy behind it is not so great, somebody's going to pick up on that. But if you're like, hey, is it possible that it's just an interpretation and that it could be something else? And the more open-ended you leave it, the better. And also if you can find a point of relatability. So for example, if you can say, is it possible that you interpreted that? I know for myself that sometimes when situation X happens, I tend to give it this kind of meaning. And, the meaning that I'm unimportant or I'm alone or whatever. And I can make it mean that. And I notice that sometimes people do that. Does that show up for you at all? So you can sort of open it into like a conversation piece and an inquiry, and that tends to help facilitate that type of conversation. And sometimes people will just be people, and sometimes they're not ready to change or look at things differently. But I do find the vast majority of the time, asking those sorts of questions, validating people's feelings, being very calm, helping them to see themselves because you're connected to yourself and you're in integrity towards you, is really, really powerful. And then if you are doing that and somebody's crossing a line or crossing a boundary for you, you can just say something like, hey, to me, I feel like boundaries are being crossed right now and I don't want to participate in the conversation any longer. I don't want to fight with you. Like, I really do want to have peace in this relationship or in this conversation, but I think we should revisit it at a different time. And just things that are like really calm, just really clear there. And these are good little lines to keep in your back pocket if you ever need them, and you can practice. So great questions, you guys. I love the questions. Honestly, I get so inspired to write content when I hear these amazing questions. I'm like, oh, I wish you asked this earlier. I would have put it in the course. But that's why it's good that we have the webinars. So Marty says, how we experience truth, is that not a subjective thing? Refuting that truth that might be temporary requires inner peace. Refuting that truth that might be temporary requires inner peace and resilience. I seem to make progress when I get external validation, not necessarily about my potential as a romantic partner, but that I am significant to another. So for you, that means that your subjective truth would be something related to wanting to feel significant, right? So that's one of the 6 basic human needs, significance. But usually there's a core wound that we can carry that's I don't matter or I'm unimportant. And so when we're in a space where we have that wound in childhood, wherever there's a void in our subconscious mind, because the brain has a homeostatic impulse, it seeks equilibrium. Wherever there's a perceived void and it's stored somewhere subconsciously, our brain then goes into sort of like overdrive to fill up that void and equilibrate and come back to homeostasis or balance, right? So there's usually a wound there. And then when somebody is making you feel like you matter, it's both meeting that basic human need and sort of helping to heal that void or that lack somewhere because of a stored previous experience that was painful. And so that's beautiful that you recognize that. That's really important to communicate. And then when you say how, like, all of that is great that you recognize that, and it's really important to communicate. And there's that's just one of your needs, right? That's something to bring into a relationship. Now, when we get over attached to another person meeting the need, that's when it can become a problem, because it can be like, oh my gosh, we're reliant on other people's reinforcement that we are significant, that we matter. But we want to be able to balance the scale sort of thing and say something to ourselves. Like, let's say we want to feel like we matter from a partner, and then a partner's having a bad day or a bad month, and they're not really giving a lot of validation. Maybe it's not even their love language. Maybe it's not something they notice or comes naturally to them. We want to be able to either ask for that from other people, like, hey, I want to feel like I matter, and I appreciate compliments. I appreciate knowing that people see my strengths, or things like that. We can ask for that, or we can give it to ourselves. And usually, just to note here, if we still have that need that's very strong, usually it's okay. Let me step back. This is actually really important. Usually, the wounds that still exist that are related to the needs that we still have and we find to be really magnified in our life are because we had a wound a long time ago, and then we continue to re-traumatize ourselves with that same process. So, for example, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and her father was very critical and very hard on her. And, she was saying, yeah, like I tend to need a lot of like compliments and validation in a relationship because I think because of my dad being critical. And I'm like, yes, good. So you've connected, like, the need now to the wound then, right? And that's powerful. But the real like golden nugget in there is that you'll always see this. I asked her, I'm like, okay, so how do you keep talking to yourself in your mind like your dad used to talk to you during those painful moments? And she's like, oh my God, it's like my internal dialogue is my dad. And this girl was really tough on herself, always nitpicking, always thinking she had to be so perfect all the time, always hypercritical of herself and her internal dialogue. So usually when that wound still exists, it's also because the need has been magnified, right? It's also because that the wound is there because we keep re-traumatizing ourselves, which means if equilibrium is here and we had a wound a long time ago that put us out of equilibrium, then we keep re-speaking to ourselves in a way that's in alignment with that wound. Like, let's say, I don't matter, I'm not good enough. And you keep telling stories and making interpretations on a daily basis about how you're not good enough, about how you don't matter, about how people don't care, about how then you're putting it like this. And then the imbalance becomes greater and greater, which means the need for external validation becomes greater and greater. Does that make sense, you guys? Because it's really important to note. And the greater the need for external validation, it's not a bad need. Like, we all have this to a certain degree, and it's part of our attachment needs to others. And that's great. But if it's something that feels like magnified or something that feels like we get a lot of pain over when it's not being met, chances are, because of a program we got a long time ago, we're still playing that out on ourselves. And the beauty in that is that we can balance the scales by noticing that, undoing those thought processes, and then intentionally give it, like, noticing our wins. Like, I get a lot of clients historically who have a lot of wounds in this area to do a journaling exercise, 10, 15 minutes in the evening, where they just intentionally look at their wins, intentionally validate themselves, intentionally look at what they did well today, how they showed up effectively, because a lot of their internal dialogue is just looking at all their flaws, all their negatives, and not looking to balance the scales. And then we create an imbalance within our perception of ourselves, and then we seek outside of us to try to fill our cup. And that can sometimes create the unhealthy dynamics for like codependency and things like that. Now, Marty's specific situation, it might just be like a need that's normalized. But if any of us feel any of that excessively for any wound or any need, and we feel too attached to that need, and we feel like that need has power over us, instead of us sort of being in charge and just recognizing, hey, there's a need here and let me take the steps to get it met. When we feel like our needs or our wounds have power over us instead of the other way around, then we start doing this work and recognizing the internal feedback that's also giving us about our internal reality on a daily basis, like what's going on in our internal dialogue. Does that make sense, you guys? Let me just scroll down and, okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just going to go back because you guys are already asking so many amazing questions. And I want to make sure I leave some room to do at least one full live example today. Okay, so I was thinking that too, Max. How we experience truth is this. Oh, so how we experience truth, is that a subjective thing? Yes. Sometimes you'll hear in like Hinduism, they say that is true, which does not change. And I won't get too into this, but, we could say that the only like real true thing is like the witness, right? We can make all these interpretations, we can make all of these things, but like in reality, when you boil it down to the core, everything we're perceiving is basically neutral. It's the meaning that we have, the collective agreements that we've made over time that make them good or bad. And sometimes people will say, what about death? What about people dying? Well, there's a tribe called the Satya tribe. I talk about this sometimes in workshops. They're spelled Satyaa, and there was a documentary about them years and years ago. And in this documentary, I saw a clip of it once. I have to go find it and like link it and put it in the group or something, because I don't know where it is. But there's this woman and she's being interviewed, and they're a tribe. Like they walk around, they have paint and feathers, and they live like in a tribal way. And they have an interviewer come and speak to them, and there's a translator, and there's this big celebration going on around. And the interviewer says to the woman, like, I heard that today is the day of your mother passed, like your mother died this morning. And this woman, her eyes are like filled with joy. Like she's so happy. And she's like, yes, the heavens took back my mother, her time came. And the Satia tribe, part of their like cultural beliefs are that death means, like, they believe that this is sort of the underworld and this is like hell essentially. And when people die, that like their spirit got called to sort of the next level and to heaven, and they're finally out of suffering, and it's a great honor and blessing, and the family is blessed. And so there's, when people die, they have these giant celebrations. And here was this woman like truly happy that her mother just died. And it just tells us how deep, because it's such a taboo thing. Like, I know for myself, I would be devastated if one of my parents died. And so I'd have to, take some time to grieve and heal and work through it. And I would feel a lot. And it's just so interesting, because what that essentially tells you at a root level is that there's a lot of collective beliefs that, or for myself, there's a lot of beliefs I'm still attached to around death and losing somebody. There's a lot of aspects there that I'd have to sort of work through. But in essence, our experiences are neutral, and truth is the collective or personal meaning that we give to things. But that's really cool too. Like, think about the magnitude of that statement when you think about these things. That means that like our healing is in our control, our emotions are in control, and our emotions are the output of our perceptions based on our beliefs and thinking. And so when we can start noticing that and using, our suffering as feedback to tell us, hey, there's some beliefs in here that we're really identified with or attached to that may not be serving the highest expression of our peace, we actually have power to create change and start controlling the situation. So Shannon says, I'm better at forgiving people for having their stories, but then I forget about my own needs. Okay, so great. I love this because I went through that. I understand. Okay, so Shannon, you're probably very aware of other people and really identified with other people's needs. Okay, so, wow, okay. So I'm just gonna, me too, Shannon. Yeah, so what you wanna do then is, now Shannon, it sounds like you're really good with your stories. I saw in the emotional mastery course that I remember you had like an example of working through a story in real time when it popped up and like seeing the huge relief, and like that was a little bit ago. So I think that you are probably pretty comfortable in that area of working through your stories and seeing the other opinion. And so then your job is to just balance the scales right now. So if you guys find yourself, Rosa says she's in that same situation. Hi, Rosa. Then you want to intentionally create space and time to practice this. Okay. So what does that mean? What do you do? It means just sit down in the evenings and journal about your feelings and needs, ideally in real time. And this is kind of like a mastery state, right? So don't rush this. Don't feel like you expect yourself to be in this space immediately. I'm not always in this space. I'm there maybe 95% of the time, but a busy week or not enough sleep or stuff like that, sometimes I'll kind of fall off a little bit. So we'll never be perfect. But the idea is that you'll be able to notice their story and then ask yourself, okay, what am I feeling and needing right now? And you'll be able to access that need as you're having a conversation, and then be able to recognize, okay, sometimes for myself, I have, okay, let's say, I don't know if this is like really personal, but sometimes for myself, like I'm with people, I'm working with people all the time. And then sometimes, let's say I come home and, or let's say I have like a family member or a couple of family members and they want to like vent to me about things. And maybe some of those things are like venting to me about another family member, another person I love. And I'm sort of the go-to a lot of the time in my family for like, oh, we have emotional stuff. We're going to, go there. And I'm trying to make sure personally in my life that the relationships I have with my family members are not something that feels like a working relationship. I want to make sure I have a boundary, right? And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll, notice when somebody starts doing that, and I'll ask myself, okay, how am I feeling today? Like, does this feel like I want to be in the space and have this conversation? Are they violating a boundary for me because they're venting about somebody I care and love? And it feels kind of not good to be hearing that about another person. And I'll check in with what my boundary is. And sometimes in my mind, in real time, I'll be like, okay, I can tell they're really in pain. It feels okay for me to listen to them vent for like a minute or maybe 2 minutes. And in my head, I'll like look at the clock, or I'll like make note of what I feel like 2 minutes will feel like. And then I'll listen for about 2 minutes and I'll say, listen, I see that you're in pain. I appreciate that. I'm sorry. And then I'll go into setting a boundary. And so see how like that example, I'm kind of checking in real time, and I'm checking in with like what I'm needing today, what I'm feeling is appropriate, what I feel is fair and in alignment with my morals and my beliefs. And then I'm setting a boundary accordingly. And so I'll take the other person into consideration and I'll try to be there, but I'll be there in a way that I feel is right for me. And I'll also move that boundary a little bit if I feel like somebody's really in pain and they don't have somebody. Like I'll compromise a little bit on that, but I do it in a way that I feel is not compromising my truth. So that's the space you kind of want to get into as well. You're listening to somebody. Be present, be as present as you can. But if you have to check out for a second to check in with yourself, that's good. That's healthy. That's not like leaving a conversation and being unpresent. It's being truly in the conversation because you and your needs are actually in the conversation. And so that's a great practice. And it starts with practicing being really aware of your feelings and needs in real time. And in all the fearful avoidant and I believe the anxious attachment courses in the workbook, there's like a little space, and the dismissive avoidant, there's a little space. This is important for all attachment styles that are insecure, where it's like 8 till 12, 12 till 4, 4 till 8, 8 till 12. It's like the time frame of your day. And the idea for that exercise in that space is to go in there and write about what you were feeling and what you were needing at different times of the day and reflecting. So your brain gets adapted and gets used to doing this work. And then all of a sudden, because you're used to doing this work, when things happen in real time, your brain's prepared and it can actually start touching on these things. So Shannon says, when I wake up, I feel a lot of bad things come up. It must be the subconscious. Yeah. I take notes to work on the various beliefs during the day. Various beliefs. During the day, I'm fine. I think I'm getting more in tune with the subconscious. That's amazing. And that's normal. Your subconscious is very much in communication with your conscious mind first thing in the morning. So if there's bad feelings in the morning, that is the perfect thing to do. Write them down and then start working for them one by one. Working through them one by one, sorry. My DA dismissed my concerns as my overthinking. So Marty says, my dismissive avoidant ex dismissed my concerns as overthinking. I then tried to overcome my own anxieties. Later, I discovered that she had lied to my face during a discussion about us. It's soul destroying when I said the truth would be okay. I'm sorry to hear that, Marty. And what you can do, right, is you can say to your ex, like if you were back in the relationship, like just for future reference, sorry, the sun comes in and out and it makes the lights change and all this stuff. I hope it's not distracting. So what you can say to your ex is, like if this were in real time and you were back in time, if somebody says to you, your concerns are just you overthinking, okay? I have to pause and I have to go inside myself and ask that question. I have to be able to say, are my concerns me overthinking? Is that true? Is that true for me, right? Are these true concerns for me that I think are valid and worth being discussed and brought into a relationship? Are these needs, or are they just me overthinking? And then when I ask myself that question, I'm going to get an answer and I'm going to feel like, no, this is truly something important to me and I have to consider. And that's building that self-trust. And then if it's truly important for me, I can go back and I can say, hey, I understand that you're perceiving it as overthinking, but I checked in with myself, and to me, I feel like this is truly an important need. So, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, that's a different conversation. And I would love to hear your side of that and what's going on inside of you. But for me, I'm recognizing this to be really important. Okay. And so you can always stand up in a sense for these needs, but in that positive place. Yeah, Aslam, when you say that's what happened with your DA, you said something and it triggered a story in him. What that says to you, right, is that person has their work to do. And maybe that person, if it wasn't that story at that time, it was probably going to be another story later. So our stories are so important to work through. And the more we work through them, the more whole and clear and clean we become, and the less activated we have the potential to be. By activated, I mean like triggered. And the more we can move through the dynamic and situation. And all we can do is our part. We are each 100% responsible for our 50% of a relationship. Okay. And how we show up can only benefit us long term, right? If we show up well, in integrity to ourselves, expressing clearly, carefully, setting boundaries, working through our stories, we are in peace. right? Maybe the relationship's tough. Maybe it's not even a match and we're going to break up eventually, but we are in peace that time. And then we are in the mind frame and mindset to prepare ourselves for the proper person to come along. And usually I truly see, like in a lot of couples dynamics over the years, I see a lot of like one person would historically come into my office, and if they're really committed to the work and they start bringing these conversations into the relationship, start setting boundaries, start speaking up, start doing all these things, usually I see that the other person takes part, right? It's hard not to want to communicate like this if you're on a bit of a journey. Yeah, it's good, Marty, to just bring into balance. Hi, WL Hong. Just joined the stream. Not sure if you mentioned anything about being calm relates to this. I was once trying to resolve issues with my ex. She got upset and started crying. She found fault in me staying calm and not reacting to her. How can I help the other person feel and understand that we are not withdrawing, dismissing? By being present. You can say to the person, right? You can sit there and you can say, I'm calm because I don't want to be out of peace right now. I don't want to be in a fight with you. I care about you and I don't want to argue. But I care about this. I'm here. Don't mistake my calmness for a lack of care. My calmness is I'm able to be this calm and present because I care that much and I'm willing to put in the work to not keep expanding an argument, right? Like, see how a lot of the answers to these questions are you just explaining your truth and just like showing up to, it's kind of like not just explaining your truth. It's kind of like knowing your truth vulnerably enough, knowing your truth in real time enough to put it into words by being tuned into yourself. But if somebody said to me, oh, you don't care, I'd say, no, I care that much. Like I'm sitting here and really remaining calm. And to remain calm, we just disidentify from our emotions. We just have to become the witness of what's going inside of us instead of attaching to the emotions, attaching to the stories. So as we witness where we feel the emotion in our body and we choose not to invest and buy in and attach, we have that ultimate power to choose how we want to react and respond. So that's the practice. Okay, so nonviolent communication. I'm a little bit familiar through clients, but I've heard a lot about it. I'm going to have to look. I've heard stories through clients like, oh, nonviolent, and people have told me stuff like this before. But I haven't ever done like a course in it, or I looked it up once. I haven't, I don't know exactly what the premises are, but there's a lot of stuff that's similar. And I like the sound of nonviolent communication, like peaceful communication. So sounds like your ex was acting out and trying to have a connection. Yeah, that's a great call. No, that's a really good call of what you said. Sounds like reassurance would have been good. That's another great thing you can add in there is reassurance. That was a beautiful piece of input. And that's what it is, like explaining vulnerably your situation and also validating or reassuring is wonderful. I started to work. Good. That's great. Awesome. It's so hard to express your needs as a fearful avoidance, but it's so powerful. Yeah. Thanks, Max, for empathizing with everybody. That's really sweet. Wow, good for you for noticing that. My inner voice is my mom talking to me. She is very critical. And so what we do is we change those thoughts. One really good thing you can do, I've talked about this a little bit before, is say cancel, cancel. It's called a pattern interruption in neurolinguistic programming. And it sounds like it's like a funny kind of mechanical thing to do, but it's really powerful just to be able to say cancel, cancel, and then replace with a new thought. Okay? So cancel, cancel. Let's say you see yourself being critical. You just use a cognitive reframe, right? So let's say you see yourself being really critical and you're like, I can't believe that you made that mistake at work. What's wrong with you? Everybody's going to judge you. You don't deserve to have this job, blah, blah, blah. Like, whoa. That, your pain, your emotional pain, when you start feeling really down or devastated or, angry at yourself, your emotions are feedback, almost always just letting you know that your thoughts are out of alignment. That's the vast majority of the time what they're telling you. Hey, you're telling yourself a story that sucks. Like, just to put it really, bluntly, that's usually what's going on. And when we can use that feedback instead of those emotions just using us and further spiraling out of control, when we can come inwards and start tweaking that story, changing that story, that's where the power to be in control of how we feel lies. Okay, so then the cognitive reframe might be, okay, no, everybody makes mistakes. I did make a mistake. What can I learn from this, right? How can I be better in the future? And I'm not going to beat myself up. Like beating myself up for this just moves me towards the problem, not the solution. So that's a really good space we can sort of enter into. But cancel, and then a cognitive reframe is a great pattern. I sometimes call this thought upgrading. And the idea is like, why do we want to keep taking our pain and re-traumatizing ourselves over and over again, right? And I was doing this for years and years, right? So we all have this inner patterning, but it's us intentionally creating the change and noticing it that counts for everything. And when you do that over time, because the subconscious is reprogrammed through repetition plus emotion, that's what creates change long term. And then you'll notice, like, honestly, you'll see with person after person, that internal dialogue stops coming back. And maybe it will jump out, once every 6 months or a year, and then you're just able to go, whoa, where did that come from? And correct the thought, right? So really important. This is so good. Also, eventually you give up trying to get the need met because it is so painful. Yeah. So really important for the fearful avoidance, but for everybody, really. Shannon says, this is really good info. Also, eventually you can give up trying to get the need met because it's so painful when you try and it doesn't happen. Remember, your job is to see your needs through. Like, just because you express it once doesn't mean the need's going to be met permanently. It means express it 5, 6, 7, 50 times if you need to, depending on the context of the situation. If somebody's disregarding your needs and just being rude and inappropriate and shaming you for having them and things like that, obviously you're just not with or in communication with the right person and should meet the need somewhere else. And if it's a romantic relationship, it's probably not the right romantic relationship if you're getting criticized or shamed for your needs. But if somebody forgets or they don't know, remember, we are often, like, imagine this. Imagine there's Tom and Jane, okay? And let's say Tom, his love language is physical touch, and he's craving affection. And let's say Jane is dismissive, avoidant, and she doesn't really care about physical affection, and her love language is acts of service and words of affirmation. And Tom is like, oh my God, I need touch in the relationship. I need hand-holding and physical affection and cuddling. And let's say Jane is kind of standoffish around that area. So what we can see, right, is that Tom can go communicate, but he can't just say his need once and then hope that it's going to be met and then feel rejected if it's not, right? Because what happens is then he's going to get into a space where really he's rejecting himself. He's going, oh, she didn't meet my need once, and so she doesn't care about me. So he's making up a story about his interpretation of the impact, when in reality, Jane has her own set of beliefs, her own set of programming, her own interpretations around what giving and receiving love is, her own subconscious comfort zone, her own way of just like being on a daily basis. So when we introduce a need into a relationship, we have to give it time to basically be patterned in. Like, the relationship itself has its own programs, essentially, for how we got accustomed to treating one another, for how we naturally show up, of the habits we've developed collectively over time. And so when we bring in a need, we have to see our needs through and ask a few times and a bunch of times. And ideally, you'll see like a blip of the person trying, and then they'll forget a little bit, and then a blip of the person trying and forget. But you're moving like this. You're constantly progressing uphill, even though it can feel like it's changing or it's taking time, and sometimes the person's forgetting. As long as you're seeing the person trying, you're on the right track, because eventually it will become a pattern, as long as you gently and kindly remind with consistency, because it's repetition plus emotion that creates the new patterning in that relationship dynamic. And then what you can do as well is you can positively reinforce the person a lot when they do meet a need, because you're creating the emotional imprint there, right? The repetition plus emotion that we need to create new programs. So I hope that answers all the questions. So Max says, Thais, do you see patterns with sleep withdrawal and the effects it has on different attachment styles? Yes. So there's something called the overload. Hold on. I have some tea. So there's something called the overload principle in psychology. And it talks about how basically our conscious mind can only process a certain amount of bits per second of information. And we get more easily overloaded when there are certain circumstances in our life that's causing our processing faculties to slow down. So for example, less sleep, we're more tired, our conscious mind's not online in the same way. When we're sick, when people are drinking alcohol, if somebody's taking a substance, even just like medication for something, anything that's affecting like the natural homeostasis of our mind and body, will cause us to break more into our subconscious because we're overloaded. And then because we're overloaded, we're more likely to act out of like the more primitive aspects of ourselves. There's more time spent in the reptilian brain more easily. There is a greater chance that we will be triggered because we're living in sort of as we start reprogramming, you can think of it like this, right? Like as you start doing reprogramming work, you're creating new neural pathways, right? And they're being reinforced over time when they're being run. And old neural pathways don't just like get deleted, they atrophy over time. So these old neural circuits, the old ways of like dealing with behavioral patterns, or the old ways of that we would cope. Let's say maybe you were naturally really defensive for a long time because that was taught to you and that's the pattern you played out for, 3 decades of your life all the way up from childhood. And then you're trying to create this like openness and receptivity and trying to be more understanding instead of defensive. You're creating new neural circuits by intentionally choosing new behavioral patterns and new thought patterns and interlacing them with emotions. But then you still have this old neural circuit that's been there for a long time and it's atrophying. But the more overloaded we are, the more naturally we are to go back to those old patterns because they're a little bit more familiar initially. Over time, that will change when you're reinforcing and these neural circuits become very strong and these become very atrophied. So you can kind of think of it through that like analogy, if that makes sense. So let's see. I'm the go-to for all my friends. Shannon, are you happy to be that? It's a good question. Max, you'd be good at this work. I feel like I always have to answer right away to give them. Yeah, excellent, Shannon. Rosa, I seem to be missing who the eternal victim is, but I think good. It sounds, came to this conclusion, my inner voice. I see. Good for you for changing that pattern of your internal dialogue. That's wonderful. Okay, so Awesome says, Thais, it brings me relief, and I also believe that if he doesn't work on himself as well, it would end any other time. Yes. I could only support him if he wanted, but he chose to cut off. Exactly. Good realization and good boundary there in your thinking as well. Okay, so Dragana, hello. Yeah, I put a Facebook post up earlier in the week, and then I sent an email out earlier in the week, and then a reminder email this morning. But yes, for sure. I'm going to put out a schedule. The schedule is really just the same time every week except for today. I see you don't have social media. Okay. So there's 3 places to check. So I'll just put a schedule out. Okay. I'll put a schedule out for the month, but the webinars always are Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, Saturdays at 3 p.m. And then earlier actually I think it was last week, we decided that because a lot of people were from Europe or different places where there's a big time zone change, people ask for a different time once a month. So once a month, I'll have a different time, but I'll put that into a schedule and just send out that schedule. And maybe, I don't want to, blow up everybody's email inbox too much, because I know my team is sending a lot of emails sometimes, or at least they were during the launch, and I was like feeling really uneasy about it. But what we can do is, nice. That's awesome, Rosa. What we can do is we'll send out that schedule, and maybe we'll send it out once a week as a reminder in the schedule. Or maybe I'll send out the schedule and then still the email reminders. I don't know. What do you guys, I would love to hear your feedback on that. Like if you guys want, an email schedule and then for me to keep sending out that calendar once a week and then also an email reminder, or if that feels like too many emails, if you guys want to share any feedback, I would really appreciate that. Cause, I don't want to just put out emails all the time and keep, sending things that are just getting under people's skin, right? I know what it's like to get lots of emails and I'm like, oh, too much. So just let me know what you're feeling about that. Goran, you're here. Good. I'm so glad. Because you're one of the ones in Europe that was like, oh, we need to do a different time. So our DAs more likely, I'm going to answer this question and then, awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you. Awesome. So I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to do a live example for the next half hour. Awesome. To be able to just go through a live example for the emotional processing tool. We did this on Tuesday, and it was a really, really beautiful time. And I'm just going to bring one more example here today so we can really see it. So Goran says, our DA is more likely to break up the relationship in the early stages than the other types. When the relationship, yes, gets more deeper, starts to require more connection, perhaps more vulnerability. Okay, so a really good question. Usually the pattern I see is that as soon as the dismissive avoidance starts to feel really vulnerable, that's when they start to deactivate. So they're usually like pretty good at those early stages. And then it's when the early stages transform into a space that requires vulnerability. It's that vulnerability, which they've got a lot of programs, stored associations that say vulnerability is really scary and really not okay. Usually it's that point in time where they start to break down the relationship. Now, it can be later on. It's actually more rare. I find that when dismissive avoidance sort of like settle into a relationship, as long as there's a baseline level of consistency and safety, they're actually less likely to leave long term because they tend to really value security and they actually don't like change that much. But it's all the steps of vulnerability they have to get through first. And if they've got, it doesn't really matter how somebody shows up, but if they've got enough triggers where there's a lot of stuff like being poked at, right? Let's say they've got high level triggers around vulnerability. Sometimes no matter how safe you make a relationship, no matter how much you show up in a positive and healthy way, sometimes there will just still be this person waiting to deactivate and try to leave the relationship because maybe their associations to vulnerability are that bad, that painful. So it's not necessarily like in anybody's control except for the person that is a dismissive avoidant. But as a general rule, they tend to stay in the relationship and be in pretty good standing until they feel like they have to be so vulnerable. And the more love they feel, the more in love they feel, the more they start to pull back. And that's like one of the big themes. And I put a video about this. I'm going to put another couple videos out today, but or record a few today and put them out over the course of the next week or so. But about sex, like one of the things that comes up, and I get so many questions about this, like nonstop, was dismissive avoidance and sex, and how a lot of the themes I hear are like, my wife or my husband or my partner, whoever it is, was like present during sex at the beginning of the relationship. And it's like, as soon as we started to really fall in love or really be connected or, get really serious, it was like the person just didn't want to be there or really sort of cut off and pulled away or shut down sex a lot, and sex dissipated from the relationship. And it's that same correlation. It's like the more vulnerability is required, the more fear will come and the more the person will need to push back. And so that's the general pattern that I see. And so I hope that makes sense. And it's a really good question. Marty says, my DA found it impossible to recognize my needs are valid, let alone meet them. I think I have the patience of a saint. In the end, well, it ended ambiguously as I should have expected. Yeah. Marty, I mean, you're doing the work. You're showing up here. You're like asking really insightful questions and sharing really insightful things. You're a human being. You're entitled to have needs. Part of a relationship is the exchange of each other meeting one another's needs. And so, what I see is that as painful as it might be that there's a breakup and that there's an ending, I would almost think that it would be more painful over the course of your life to be with somebody and have those little paper cuts on a daily basis of little pain points where you're with somebody who's just, dismissing your needs, invalidating them. And maybe as much as there's pain now, maybe it's less pain over the course of your life because you're getting the chance to go inwards, heal, connect to yourself, validate your own needs, do the work, and then show up and with the potential of a really healthy and beautiful relationship going forward. So I hope that makes sense, and it might be a good thing to just take note of. Did she withdraw every time you express your needs? Yeah, if there's a lot of withdrawing when somebody expresses needs, it's not a good sign. Okay. Okay, so does anybody want to share a live example? So I know we had Nellie do an amazing one last time, as well as Ellie. So does anybody want to share a live example for the emotional processing worksheet? And if not, then I can go through and just share like a common story that I see, or I can sort of pick something if I think about it where you guys might Interesting. Sorry, I'm going to read this comment from Alex in a second, but I can just pick an example because I can sort of tell who's in here and like some of the patterns with you guys. And I can always pick an example that will just resonate with everybody. I posted something on Facebook today. Okay. Is that a live example, Oslam? I'm curious. So Alex says, Thais, since joining PDS, when I find myself engulfed in an emotional traffic jam, I ask myself, what would Thais do? Thank you. Do you know that people tell me that sometimes? Thank you so much for saying that. That's so funny. But to be real with you as well, I go through things too sometimes. Like I'm going to be a human being forever. I mean, it's honestly, since really diving in and learning and doing so much work, life is just way, way, way easier to navigate. But I have moments too where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to work through my emotions. But that's so funny. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I posted something on Facebook today doing the emotional mastery course. Okay, so let me just find it. I have it open so I could go through some of the great comments in here. And you guys, I'm just so like my heart smiles every time I go through the Facebook group. Okay, awesome. I don't see it for some reason. It was today. Goran posted a cool thing. Oh, I like that. Trauma mind. Oh, here it is. Okay. 3 hours ago, right? I am an FA. There's so much going on in the Facebook group. I just scroll down for a little bit. I am an FA struggling with expressing my needs. I did the emotional mastery course and trying to apply what I've learned. So here we go. Step 1, witness and label your emotion. Okay, cool. We're going to do this example. Yes. Okay. Especially, and it's great that you're an FA because I know there's a lot of FAs in the course today. So I'm just going to read this out loud. So witness and label your emotion. Good. So I want you to notice. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste this into the group. Okay, and I'm going to do this in here so you guys can all see it. I do this. I like that idea. Okay, so can you guys see that? I just posted this. Do I have, it won't let me enter it because it's too long. Okay, so I'm just going to do this in sections. So step 1, can you, okay, it's not going to let me, it's too many characters. There's only 200 characters allowed. Okay, so I'm going to read this out loud and I'm going to reread the steps as we go. Okay, so Azam says she has a heavy flu. So she's going through a live example here and using the steps. Okay, so I have a heavy flu. I'm sorry you're sick. That's not fun. And I don't want to get up from my couch, which makes it more difficult to distract myself from my thoughts. And interestingly enough, synchronistically, as we've been discussing, because you're sick, you're also more in your subconscious because of the overload principle. So your mind's processing is slowing down because your resources are going to healing in other areas of your body. And now you're sort of more on autopilot or in that sort of subconscious space, right? So just notice that. That's okay. And be gentle to yourself as you're going through this, okay? So you said step 1, witness and label your emotion. So I just want you to notice. So then Azam wrote her answer here in the group. And if you guys are curious, this is all in the group. Oh, it's actually close to the top. Okay, so if you're curious, you can go into, I must have been down beneath. You can go into the Facebook group and see this, but I'm going to just read this. So she says, step 1, witness and label your emotion. And she writes, I have a heavy flu and I don't want to get up from my couch, which makes it more difficult to distract myself from my thoughts. So I want you to notice here that you skipped witnessing and labeling the emotion, which is very common. So the actual emotion would be, what's the feeling? So see how you went to your thoughts. You talked about your interpretation. So your feeling might be sadness, frustration, anger, hurt, despair, irritability. So there's so many emotions. So we just want to, step 1, we want to like witness and label the emotion. And then we want to ask, like, we have to isolate the problem, which is good, which you sort of did in there. And then step 2, ask yourself, Oop, I think I just pushed on the microphone. And can you guys still hear me? I pushed on the microphone by accident. Yeah. Okay, good. So loneliness, helplessness, rejection. Excellent. So these are the feelings. Good job. Okay, thanks, Shannon. So that's step one. Okay. And then ask yourself, what thoughts am I thinking? What meaning are you giving to the situation? I have been rejected. He doesn't even care to ask how I'm doing. I am helpless. I'm alone, and I will be alone forever. Excellent. Okay. So this is wonderful. So now we're going to go. Okay, good. So now we're going to go. I love this. Okay, this is a great. I'm going to take it from here because then the rest of your questions are like getting there and you're doing a good job. But I'm just going to take it from here. So we're going to write the interpretations. The interpretations are, I have been rejected. He doesn't care. I am helpless. I'm alone. I will be alone forever. Okay, so I am rejected. He doesn't care. I am helpless. I am alone. I will be alone forever. Okay, so we're going to work from the bottom up. So number one, I am alone and I will be alone forever. Okay, so we're going to work through this together. Okay, so I am alone. Is it true? Can I absolutely know that it's true with 100% certainty that I am alone? And just see what comes up for you, Aslam. So notice what happens, right? So are you with 100% certainty sure that you are completely alone? And the idea here is that if we can find, good, okay, if we can find one counteracting piece of proof, remember, when your brain tells the story you're alone, your brain identifies with that thought and the feeling that's then produced. So your brain, I just want you to notice first, when you tell yourself the story, I'm alone, you're picturing like I am fully, totally alone. You're almost like creating that paradigm for yourself as if you're truly, completely alone. So you said not alone in the sense of friends and family. So we're just looking for like a yes or no answer for this. So, and we're going to get to that next step. So in that step, I am alone. Can I know with certainty that it's true? And the answer is no, not with certainty, because not in the sense of friends and family. You have one piece of counteracting proof. So now I just want to ask, okay? So we're working through one at a time. So Aslam, a couple things really quickly first, like side notes here. How do you start to feel? What happens to you when you tell yourself the story, I'm alone and I'll be alone forever? What goes on inside of you? And see if you guys can notice, like tune in for a moment to any experiences you might have had where you tell yourself the story, I'm alone. And exactly, sadness, pain, right? And then imagine for just a moment, just in theory, that you could sit there on the couch and be sick and white out all of those thoughts. For whatever reason, it's not possible to think those thoughts. What do you feel instead? Exactly, Shannon. Desperation, Goran says sadness. If we white out those thoughts and no thoughts exist about that, there's relief, right? So just make that connection. Notice that, the story is creating so much of the suffering, right? Yeah, I get fearful, like survival, when I tell myself I'm alone. That's a great one. And it's difficult and scary when I think no one finds me valuable enough to be in my life as a partner. Yeah, okay, so see how that's a story, right? I think that nobody finds me valuable enough to be in my life as a partner, okay? So just notice, can I 100% know that I'm alone? And now let's look for proof of otherwise, okay? So let's look for, how are you not alone? And we're just going to start with, because when your brain says I'm alone, your brain pictures you like on a desert island alone. Like it may not be exactly that picture, but your brain's living that emotional reality at that time, okay? Versus like think of how your brain feels when your brain's like, well, I have a community, I have family and friends, I have people around me that support me, I have people who care about me. I do have time to meet somebody romantically. Like when we start telling a different story, we feel and experience a different reality. So So Aslam, who in your life do you have that makes you not alone? So who exists? And I want you to feel about this for a moment. So, we have a community here that cares about you and supports you. This is beautiful. That was a great answer. So I have a fantastic daughter. I have great friends and you lovely people being supportive. So try to feel about that for a second. Try to feel like what it's like to have your daughter and to know that she's there and to know that she cares about you. And just feel like that's, with her around, you definitely can't be alone, right? Like with her, knowing that she exists, there's not an aloneness there. And maybe the love that you have for her. And then think of your friends and maybe the people you can call and maybe the feelings that come up when you see them. And to know, like, if you're sick on your couch and you're like having a bad day, and maybe if you called one of them and said, hey, I just need a buddy, maybe one of them would come. Or think of those feelings, right? And we want to sit with this and just like notice it. And that's a great answer. It's a blessing. So you're not alone, right? And so you see that. And now, you're saying I'm alone. I'm going to be alone forever. So there's this fear of like, not going to be alone forever, but it's like romantic, I hear, right? So I'm romantically, I think you said, going to be alone forever. So is that true? Can you know with 100% certainty that that's true? And see what comes up. Okay. Max says, and usually us fearful avoidants are great at connecting with people, right? This is true. This is very true, actually. And so, because fearful avoidance, like love, connection's what kept us safe a lot of the time, right? So you say, I don't know what the future will bring exactly. And when you guys look, we have the depression course coming out soon too, but we have the anxiety course that was out yesterday. And in there, we talk about all the different cognitive distortions. And one of them is fortune telling, right? And it's this idea that I project, and the human mind does this, right? It's a way of trying to keep yourself safe. But we want to consciously recognize this and be able to separate from this behavior because it causes us pain. And so you don't know what the future will bring. Now, I'm going to ask you to, what qualifies you to potentially not be alone forever. Okay. And so let's look at, Aslam, let's look at different qualities or traits that you have that you might, that could be appreciated in a relationship. Okay. So like number one, you're doing your work. You're in a place of personal growth, right? And development, which honestly, I think we all need in order to be capable of being in a healthy relationship. We need to have that sense of self-awareness. So do you guys know Aslam from the group? And do we see any other qualities or traits? So number one, aware. Number two, intelligent. Number three, doing the work. Beautiful. A passion for growth and learning. That's beautiful. What other things come up for you? Aslam. I like to support people. That's beautiful. So I hear as well in that you're kind and you're generous and thoughtful, which I think are like, no matter which way we look at it, those are really important qualities for a romantic relationship. Good. You're funny, kind, generous, thoughtful, funny. These are amazing. Able to be vulnerable by doing this. That's a great one. Very patient and kind to others. Beautiful. Right? So these really powerful qualities. It sounds like you have a loving and healthy relationship with your daughter. And I think, anybody who's raising kids, there has to be a lot of wisdom that comes with that life experience, right? And a lot of commitment and a lot of ability to really show up. And, so we have wise, we have committed, beautiful, a great friend, connected to others, empathetic, I hear and I see from how you show up in the group. Cool and caring mom, beautiful. So let me ask you, I'm going to read these qualities back. Okay. We're sort of doing this the other day. It's interesting. People have like the same sort of pain points. So I want you to imagine for a moment, right, that you're looking for somebody in a relationship and this person, okay. So imagine Aslam, you meet somebody and they are aware, they're smart, they have a passion for growth, a passion for learning, they're working on themselves, so they're expanding and growing, they're supportive, they're funny, they're able to be vulnerable, which Shannon hits on, and it's like such an important point for a relationship. They're kind, they're generous, they're thoughtful, they're very patient, they're kind, they're a great friend, they have a beautiful community of friends, they're wise, they're committed, they're empathetic, like they're a cool parent and very caring, right? Like this sounds to me like an amazing person for a relationship, right? So to me, these are amazing pre-qualifiers for a relationship. And when we look at, we can know these things and you'll know whether these things are true or not, but, are these things true for you, Aslam? And if they are true for you, you want to ask yourself, if I know that these things are true, then I know what's more true, that I'm going to be alone forever, or that, yes, exactly. It turns out I'm a catch, right? And so, yes. And so, what brings you relief? The truth of these qualities that you know about yourself, or this painful story that creates this imagined reality where you see yourself being alone forever and all these different things. And what you hold on to impacts how you feel, and most importantly, impacts how, maybe not most importantly, but probably how you feel is more important, but impacts how you show up in a relationship. How do we treat, a date or a person that we're attracted to when we're believing, oh my gosh, I'm going to be alone forever? We either settle and we just take whatever comes, or we, reject our own feelings and needs in the situation, or we, avoid, we get afraid, oh, this isn't going to work out anyways, they're not going to like me, and so I just push them away, or we become clingy and hold on really, really tight, or so no matter what happens, right? That story always moves us back towards the problem. So now see what you've done just in this area. You've peeled back that first set of layers, right? So you've gone, okay, I've been able to create space between myself and the story, right? And good, exactly. So you've created space between yourself and the story. So now when you catch yourself trying to go back to that story, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a subconscious program. Probably based on, if you looked, right, there's some trauma about being alone in childhood, or maybe a past breakup that really hurt or something like that, that's creating that fear. And so, that's just my subconscious mind trying to recreate an old paradigm or program. And you want to be able to peel that back, notice it, and intentionally create new thoughts that support what you want the desired outcome to be, what you want to have for a relationship. And telling this old painful story doesn't help you or serve you, right? So notice that. And then let's go back to the other stories in here. I am helpless. Is it true? Can you know with 100% certainty that you're helpless? And I would say, helpless is like sort of powerless. I can't change anything. I'm stuck, and is that true? And what comes up for you? And I love your answer here. I settle and I've started to work on my boundaries. Now I need to find the balance. It's good. And what comes up for you, about helplessness? Can you know with certainty you're helpless? Good. So I'm a very strong person in all other areas of life. And so where do you have control, right? What's the opposite of helplessness? Maybe control or empowerment are the ones that I see resonate with people the most. And so I see that you have control over your perception, right? If we can't control our external circumstances, we can definitely control how we choose to think and feel about them, and what we choose to take from them, and how we choose to learn because of them, and how we choose to grow through them, right? So we've got that. I can choose my thoughts about the situation. I can say I'm alone forever. I can say I have great qualities and I'm worthy of love, and I'm going to love myself and meet my own needs and heal as much as I can and grow as much as I can. Maybe there's not even a lot of healing. Maybe it's just growth that you want to achieve until that right person comes. And I'll prepare myself mentally, emotionally for that time, right? So there's control there, okay, or empowerment there, whichever one you want to pick. Maybe control is sort of a negative word. Like we have to control everything, but it's also fitting, right? Because sometimes we're just seeking control, and a lot of that comes in our mind, right? You said you're a strong person in other areas of life. You're good at analyzing and finding solutions, but struggle with overthinking and perfection, high expectation for myself. Okay. Super fearful avoidance of you. So I bet everybody can sort of relate to that, right? So good. You're good at analyzing and finding solutions. So may I make a suggestion that will help for control? I'm going to put this in somewhere in the course because I've been doing this work this week with clients, and it's like very powerful work. So what you want to do, right, is you want to almost map out all the steps to whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So let's say it's relationships. It's just a little exercise. And you can go like this. You imagine yourself going through all the stages of a relationship. Okay. So meeting somebody, being interested in them asking you on a date or vice versa, talking to them before the date, whether it's, a phone call or texting, going on the first date, going on the second date, and the time in between. You visualize the stages of the relationship, and you walk yourself through going through those stages of a relationship. And as you walk yourself through, okay, you imagine all the fears that come up. You look for the fears, the doubts, the insecurities, the limiting beliefs. And then you go in there, right? And you work them through. So you work them out, you question them, can I know that the person won't like me? Can I know that the person, and as you work them through and question them and create new stories, you also intentionally create different behavioral responses. So let's say historically, if I find myself, when I'm interested in somebody was saying this to me yesterday, when I'm interested in somebody, I notice myself just like basically push them away. Like they come near me and I'm like, because I think it's not going to work out, or I think they're going to hurt me in the end. And so I push them away. So you intentionally create a new behavior. Through exposure response reprogramming, you're like, okay, no, when I feel myself going to do that, I'm going to choose this instead. I'm going to choose being vulnerable instead. I'm going to choose opening myself instead. And it's going to feel scary and vulnerable, but you're using your conscious mind to do something different. And through persistence is not a word, persistence, consistency. I just merged two words. As you do that, right, you're creating new patterns, and through repetition plus an emotional imprint each time that takes place, you're reprogramming that entire thing, right? So it's really important to note and to practice. So that's one thing. Now, another thing is, I sort of took us off track. So that's what you would do, right? You'd go through all the phases of getting into a relationship, look at all the stories, look at all the behavioral responses, and intentionally change the story to something that's a cognitive reframe, not something that's an untrue story, but something that's empowering. Like, even if things don't go perfectly, I know that I'm working on myself and I can get further ahead than I have in the past, or like whatever cognitive reframes are there that are meaningful and true for you. And then a new behavioral response. And you're preparing yourself to move through all stages to get into a relationship sort of optimally, right? And you can do this for career. You can do this for any area of your life. So I'm going to create a little like module somewhere and put that in a course, because that's a way of sort of mapping everything out and then taking all the action steps and removing all the obstacles and limitations in advance. Does that make sense to you guys? So going back to this though, you say you're good at analyzing and finding solutions, and struggle with overthinking, perfection, and high expectations. Yes. So when you look at this, right, and you're asking yourself, you're helpless, can you know with absolute certainty that you're helpless? And see where else there's empowerment in your life. So just look at this. Like, if you're empowered in all these other areas of your life, why are you not empowered in the relationship area? Chances are that it's just because you've got more painful beliefs there that are blocking you at a subconscious level. And you're empowered to change that by opening up and doing the work and taking all the action steps that you are, right? By being in this webinar, by being in the courses, by noticing the beliefs that come up, by pulling it through the emotional mastery tool. So see, as you're taking these steps, beautiful. I am not helpless. I am a high achiever, actually. So do you start to notice, and we're going to get into the last two, but do you start to notice thus far, awesome, like the little bits of relief? It's not solving the entire problem or changing everything, but you're getting the little bits of relief as you like, okay, I'm not alone. Interesting. That's really interesting. I'm not alone. I'm not going to be alone forever. Like when we're living in that paradigm that says I'm going to be alone forever and we're believing that, it's excruciating. And then when we can recognize, okay, no, that's not the truth. And I'm emotionally equilibrating it by finding the proof that elicits the emotional response. I step out of that reality and then there's a little bit of relief. Now, when you say maybe I find comfort in that feeling, why? What needs does it meet to feel that way? Is it because it's familiar? It's a really good thing to notice, right? Like sometimes we stay in our pain because it's a subconscious comfort zone, or because we're afraid that if we're a high achiever in all areas of life, maybe we'll disconnect from our friends. Maybe they won't like us. Maybe, there can be so many different versions, but it's good to introspect if you're feeling like that might be the case. I was alone in my childhood, taking care of myself. Okay, so do you see? It's a bit of a subconscious comfort zone. So if you want to break the comfort zone too, you can sit down with a pen and paper, Aslam, and you can ask yourself, you can ask yourself, there will be a subconscious comfort zone there. So ask yourself the question, even though this might feel comfortable, how does it cause me pain long term? And what will my life be like 10 or 20 years from now if I don't change these beliefs, if I don't work through these pain points? What will I feel? What will I think? And just by noticing, because the brain's wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure, just by noticing, your brain will start to associate the beliefs with pain, and it'll give you a piece of leverage for even more change. Does that make sense? Okay, and I'm going to keep us on track though. Interesting. Yeah, that's true. It's okay to not need a romantic relationship. When you guys are in like your journey, when I was in my journey, I was like very single, didn't go on a single date or have a single romantic conversation for 4 years straight. Just literally like doing myself, my work, my diving really deep, because we get a lot of our needs met when we start opening to connection within ourselves. And then that will change. Eventually you'll just feel like, I have room for this now. I'm interested in this now. And that's a natural evolution. But usually because we've been so out of relationship to ourselves, when we start doing this like deep diving and connecting to ourselves, usually what you see is that the brain's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to put all this time into myself now and create romantic space, because the brain's trying to equilibrate. It realizes there was this big perceived void of relationship to self and self-work, and it goes into hyperdrive to fill that void. So that's normal, just so you guys know. I see this with very, very, very many people. Not everybody though. And you might just still have a really high personality need for romantic relationships, and that might surpass the void of relationship to self. But it's different for all individuals, but it's very common that I see this. So sorry, I'm digressing. So see these sort of layers coming back, right? And then the next one in here you have is, he doesn't care and I am rejected. Okay. I'm glad. I'm really glad. So yeah, that's perfect, Shannon. That's beautiful. You're just not ready at this point, right? But you still want one. That's a beautiful perspective, and you'll know when you're ready and it feels right. And there is no rush if you're feeling empowered and grateful for where you're at right now, right? So awesome. I am rejected. Okay, this is a really interesting one. Okay, and I'm going to do like a bit of a deep dive on this. It may not resonate with everybody, but I just want us to notice and have this perspective because it's very interesting. So I am rejected by him. Is it true? I am rejected. And what comes up for you, Aslam? You're welcome, Shannon. See what comes up for you. I am rejected. Okay, and it sounds like from the situation, from what I understand, he broke up with you, right? But can you 100% know that you are rejected by him? And I want to see what comes up. And one perspective I would offer, okay, and some of us will not be willing to accept this, and that's totally okay. This is just like what your mind sits with and resonates with at any point in time. But sometimes, I tell this story sometimes, and it's like, if I say to a person, like, you're a purple monster, right? And I'm like, you're a purple monster. And I tell them this, it's not gonna hurt, right? No matter how many times I try to reject somebody by saying they're a purple monster, it's not gonna permeate them, because no part of them believes that they're a purple monster. And so they're just gonna be like, what's going on, woman? Like, what are you saying? Right? And so if I say to somebody who has a wound around feeling not good enough, oh, you didn't do a good enough job on that thing, oh, it's going to hurt. And so usually at a deep level, by technicality, it's very hard to reject somebody. What happens is, a situation or a circumstance happens, and we're not making somebody feel something. We're helping them feel what already exists inside of them. And so a lot of the times at the root level, there is this element of somebody does something, and maybe it's not a fit. Maybe the needs aren't lining up. Maybe it wasn't a natural match in a relationship. But I take that and I make that mean that it was about me, and I'm unworthy, and I wasn't good enough, and I wasn't liked enough. And instead of making it like, hey, this was a mismatch, I make it mine, and I kind of reject myself with that situation. And this can or cannot be true. It's what resonates with each of us. You said, I'm not sure what I'm ready for in a relationship. He misunderstood and thought that I am rejecting him. And despite my explanation that I want him, he disappeared. Wow. I don't know why I said I'm not sure what I want for a relationship. Probably my dismissive part when things get serious. Wow. So what I hear is that he rejected himself with what you said, and then couldn't get over his own perceived rejection and ran away and protected himself and hid. That's what I hear. Does that resonate with you at all? And it's quite possible that that was your dismissive part, right? Or maybe you weren't sure yet. And, I want to note that if it's the right person, and that, I want to note that if a person is really healthy and stable and you say, I'm not sure if I want a relationship, they might say, well, what do you feel? Like, do you want one in the future? Are you speaking from a fear? What's going on? Because this is what I want, X, Y, and Z. And if you're just going to take a little bit more time to get there, I'll stick around because I'm very interested. But if you're saying that I'm not the right person, then I would like to know that as well, so I can move on also. And then, take some time and think about it and get back to me. That would be sort of a healthy response. But if somebody says, I don't know what I want in a relationship, and I go, oh, running away, seeing the door, then that person might have had some stuff to work on. And if it didn't come up in that moment there, it was probably going to come up in another moment when maybe there was more emotional investment in the relationship, or it was going to come up as a pain point, or, we can never know for certain, but chances are, right? So I hear that. Wow, he just said, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I hear that he really rejected himself. And so, had that not happened, it would be interesting to see, right? So we don't know that he was rejecting you as the person, that he wasn't interested in you and that you were rejected. We know that he rejected the situation probably because he interpreted it through his own filter of his own wounds and rejected himself accordingly. That's what I see. And so he doesn't care. Can I know with certainty that he doesn't care? And what comes up for you, Oslam, for that question? Can I know that he just doesn't have any care right now? Because what I sort of see is, until that moment, I thought we had a great connection. It was out of the blue. Yeah. And maybe he told, yeah, he did care. I think that if he didn't care very much, it probably wouldn't have affected him in the same way. But it's not just that, right? It's the care combined with his wounds. So, yeah, so lots of care. But it sounds like he really personalized it and rejected himself, and that he has some healing and stuff to do, right? So now the question becomes, and what do you need in this situation? So do you just need to recognize that this wasn't the right person? Do you need extra support and love? Do you need to really connect to yourself? Do you need, like maybe for closure purposes, sometimes we feel that we need to explain a situation and send an email for closure and say, hey, I'm sorry that you interpreted it this way. Now, I'd be really careful here if this is the need that comes up, just because he doesn't sound like he's a very healthy person. So it sounds like he was very hyper reactive and may not be prepared for a healthy romantic relationship. So we want to make sure that if we need to have a conversation, that need is not also secretly to reignite a relationship that may not be right for us. So, maybe you need to consider if this is a truly healthy relationship. Good. Excellent. Perfect answer. I need to take care of myself. I'm not ready to contact him as he is reactive. Perfect answer. So that's good. That's the answer I was hoping for. I thought it was going to be to contact or explain, because sometimes I see it go in that direction. So, and was always blaming others. There you go. Right? So it sounds like he had a lot of wounds. It was his pattern of him rejecting himself. So it's interesting. Do you notice a difference between when you're in those thoughts and in those stories? Because it turned out that none of them were really true, right? Sometimes we'll have one or two that are true, but usually they're not, honestly, if we are really open-minded and really willing to look. And you did a great job at being open-minded and look. And looking. So notice, what's the difference between when you're identified with those stories and you're in them and you're on the couch and you're thinking, I'm going to be alone forever and I'm so rejected and he never cared. And, that's excruciating. That's extremely painful. Right. And then we hold that next to being able to see the situation for what it is, because we sat with it and we looked and we questioned and we moved through these things. And there's a big difference. Right. And so there's a big relief. And so it's not going to make the breakup go away. Right. Then we look at the needs and then we look at what we need to give to ourselves, but it makes the suffering of the breakup go away. And if we go back into suffering, we know that we're probably thinking a suffering-based thought, and we can step out of it and we can correct it and we can choose to move into a different direction. Okay. And we can say cancel, and upgrade our thinking and change the process. So that's always in our power to do. And then what you said is, I want to take care of myself. And so I would just put, that last part, what are all the strategies you want to put together to take care of yourself? Maybe, journal with your thoughts, keep pulling through the emotional processing tool if everything comes at any point, if anything comes up. I like to think of breakups as beautiful opportunities, because they also bring all of our wounds to the surface, all of the old stories, all of the stuff. And if we keep sitting down and we keep doing the work and we keep moving through and doing a worksheet, then what happens, right, is every time that we do a worksheet, every time we work through a story, we're equilibrating and we're noticing those wounded parts of ourselves, and we can catch them way more easily next time if they ever try to come back. We can shift our perspective in a way that emotionally imprints us enough to change the programming altogether. We can master these tools that are so important for our health and wellness and emotional well-being for our entire lives in any situation. So even though they're painful right now, sometimes that pain is this opportunity to bring all those pain points that we're living inside of our subconscious to the surface and into the light and question and move through them. And so I would look at it as this is a great time for healing. It's I always took my parents' weaknesses and wounds on myself. Now I do the same for partners. It's not my fault. This isn't your fault. I have the responsibility to heal in the relationship to yourself. Right? Not to heal anybody else or anybody else's relationship to themselves, but to heal in the relationship to yourself. Absolutely. And this is a beautiful realization. So the next thing, right, is just the needs, and then you put a strategy together. So what are my strategies to take care of myself? And I would just sit down and write. Thank you. Really, you're doing all the work here, right? I'm just sitting here asking some questions. So you're your hero. But that was very sweet. So, and I appreciate it. So write out all the little strategies. What makes me feel cared for? And just take some time. And I would almost sit with that, see what comes up, look at the 7 areas of life and where you want to take care of yourself, and just move through those things one by one. So I hope that makes sense. I love doing these. These are my favorite examples of live webinars. And I love doing them with everybody in here, because I feel like there's so much support from everybody. So thank you. And I hope this, this is one of the most important tools I will always push in the school. I would say the most important tool, period, because if you master this tool, you can master, oh, beautiful. That's amazing. Awesome. That's so cool. So if you master this tool, you can really master how you're feeling. And then every painful feeling becomes an opportunity to heal further and to recognize unhealed parts of yourself and move through them. So I'm going to do maybe like every single, awesome, Shannon. I'm so happy to hear that. So I'm going to probably do an emotional processing worksheet webinar once a month, just so we stay on track and connected. And I'm going to, that's nice, Shanna. Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that too. And I appreciate all this feedback. So maybe we'll do once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks. You guys let me know, like, any feedback in the Facebook group when you guys want to do more emotional processing webinars, any of that. Thanks, Nellie. Let me know. Okay, good. I'm so glad. So maybe we'll just do more and more live examples, and maybe I'll go through in all of the courses from now on. Instead of sharing bonus content and answering questions, maybe we'll do like half questions and half just exercises from the different courses, because I think the real integration of them is what really matters. Do you think dismissal avoidance actually have it? Yes. I've actually talked about this in a webinar, I think, but you've probably been to most of the webinars. So one of the different, that was really sweet, Marty. So one of the different, and I have to super run in a second because I have a thing to get to, but one of the different things about dismissal avoidance that makes them really unique is they tend to all have, from what I've seen, I haven't seen an exception to this yet, core belief around being alone, that they will always be alone in the end. There's like a deep, deep subconscious belief that they will eventually be alone or abandoned. But then there's more positive associations and negative associations to being alone, because alone felt controllable and safe versus there are stored associations to expressing vulnerability and crying or having a need and being emotional, and then trying to express that need and then not getting that need met from their parents. If there was a lot of emotional neglect, that became so painful. It was just easier to be alone and create space, and that was controllable and it was safer and it felt emotionally better. And so there tends to be positive associations to being alone. It's amazing that you're picking that up. You guys are like blowing me away with like the growth and the insights and the questions. And honestly, I'm like learning, because you guys are asking such poignant questions, that I'm able to go, oh my gosh, this and this, and make these connections and reflect on all the different people I've seen in the patterns. And so it's I'm getting to grow along with you guys, which is a great blessing. Cool. Okay. So Shayna says half exercise, half questions format. Okay, that's what I'll do. I love that. I'll start setting it up that way. And we'll pick the different courses and the different major exercises. Like, for example, another exercise that I just find to be so helpful, and I say this because I use this all the time in my life, is like the reverse engineering method I put together, which is like all the steps. It's in the procrastination course. And there's a similar method in the Mindset Mastery course that will be out in a week or so. I'll pick key exercises that I think everybody should have mastered in their life, and we'll do it that way. Okay. Thank you so much. A special thank you to Awesome for sharing and being vulnerable. I so appreciate it. And thank you guys for being in here and being so supportive and so intelligent and aware, and just like really amazing to work with and do this work with. And I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you guys on Tuesday. Bye, Max. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.